Corticon enables you to store rule execution data for auditing and analysis. Imagine a decision service that processes customer orders at an online retail store. Each time a customer places an order, the decision service performs a number of operations. It checks if the customer is a preferred cardholder. It processes coupons offering $10 off on the next order if the customer's shopping cart is worth $75 or more, and so on. Storing rule execution data in a database can be valuable. It enables you to analyze and gain important insight into the behavior of your rules. For instance, you could use it to trace the execution sequence that led to a particular result. In this video, you will see how to set up Corticon 5.5.2 to store a decision service's execution data to a database. To record decision service executions, we need to perform 3 steps. First, we need to set up the database schema. Then, we need to enable Corticon Server's execution recording service. Finally, we need to configure the decision service's properties to enable the recording service to write its execution data to the database. Corticon Server can write to any of the supported databases, such as Progress OpenEdge, Microsoft SQL Server, Oracle, and IBM DB2. Here we will use a Microsoft SQL Server 2014 Express database named Corticon Execution Records that we have already created. To begin, we create a schema for the database using Corticon Studio. We select Project, Create Execution Recording Schema. This opens the Create Schema dialog box. Here we specify the database server, which in our case is SQL Server 2014. We define the database URL, entering the host name, which is localhost, and the database name, which is Corticon Execution Records. Next, we define the username and password. Let's click Test Connection. This helps us verify that our database connection values are correct. At this point, we are creating the database schema. Later, when we enable Corticon Server to start the execution recording service, we will need to define these same property values in Corticon Server's BRMS properties file. One way to prepare for that step is to copy these property values into a text editor so we can use them later. To do this, we click Show Encrypted Values and copy the properties to a text editor. The username and password values are encrypted, but that does not matter. Corticon Server will be able to decrypt these values when it reads its BRMS properties file. Finally, we click Finish. It takes a few seconds to create the database schema. Once it is ready, we see a message, like this one, stating that the execution recording schema was created successfully. Let's take a quick look at the schema. In SQL Server Management Studio, we expand the Corticon Execution Records database. As you can see, new tables have been added. The CC Execution table stores date and time information each time the decision service executes. The CC Payloads table stores the input and output payloads. The CC Rule Messages table stores rule messages that are generated during execution. Now that the database schema is ready, let's move on to Step 2, enabling Corticon Server's execution recording service. To do this, we must modify Corticon Server's BRMS properties file, which is located in Corticon Server's work directory. We open the file in a text editor and scroll down to the execution recording property. We uncomment this line and change the property value to true. By default, this will enable the execution recording service to record the execution timestamp as well as the payload and rule messages. We can also choose to suppress recording payload by changing the payload recording property to false and suppress recording rule messages by changing the rule messages property to false. Because we want to record everything, we do not modify these properties. Next, we need to define the database connection properties. Recall that earlier we copied these values from Corticon Studio into a text editor. We'll now insert them at the end of Corticon Server's BRMS properties file. Let's save the file. Corticon Server's execution recording service is enabled. Now we come to our final step, configuring the decision services properties to enable recording. There are a number of ways to set this property. In this video, we'll configure the property while adding the decision service to a web console application. To prepare for deploying the decision service through the web console, we first need to package our rule flow into an EDS file using Corticon Studio. An EDS file is a precompiled package that contains all assets that Corticon Server needs to deploy and run a decision service. Here is our rule flow, called Order Rules, that we need to package. We select Project, Package and Deploy Decision Services. This opens the Package and Deploy Decision Services wizard, where we select Package and Save for later deployment, and click Next. We then select our rule flow, specify a path to store the EDS file, and click Next. Finally, we click Finish. The rule flow is now packaged into a deployable EDS file, as you can see here. Next, we deploy the EDS file using the web console. We have already started Corticon Server, so we open the web console and create a new application in the Applications tab. Let's call the application My Application. Since our Corticon server is installed on the same computer as the web console, we select Local Server in the Servers drop-down. Now, let's add the decision service to the application. We click Add in the Decision Services section. This opens the Add Decision Service pop-up, where we give a name to our decision service, choose the EDS file that we created earlier, and set the maximum pool size for the decision service. Right after the maximum pool size property is a property called Use Execution Recording Service. This is where we set the property to enable execution recording. We check this property, retain the default settings for the other properties, and click Add. This brings us back to the application page, where we now see a new button called Save and Deploy. We click this button to deploy the application containing our decision service to Corticon Server. Now, all three steps are done. We have created the database schema, we have set up Corticon Server to start its execution recording service, and we have configured our decision services properties to enable the recording service to write its execution data to the database. Let's test it by invoking this decision service. In the web console, we select our decision service, click Test Execution, and supply a SOAP request file that we created earlier for testing. As you can see, the XML message gets displayed in the request area. We delete the SOAP tags from the request because the web console will add them when it invokes the decision service. Finally, we click Execute. As you can see, the decision service processed the data and sent a response message. Now, let's verify that the execution data is written to the database. In SQL Server Management Studio, we expand the Corticon Execution Records database. We right-click CC Execution and choose Select Top 1000 Rows. As you can see, the decision services execution is recorded here with a start and stop timestamp. Let's run the same query on CC payloads. As you can see, the input and output payloads have also been recorded. The execution ID column links each payload record to the execution record in the CC execution table. Finally, let's run the same query on CC rule messages. As you can see, the rule messages have also been recorded. You have now seen how you can capture rule execution data in a database for later auditing and analysis.